In a dimly lit recess of the Gibraltar Museum, a strange skull with a beetle brow and low forehead used to glower at the occasional perplexed tourist who wandered in from the colony's sun and warm beer. To most, the assemblage was just a peculiar set of bones, an intriguing oddity and little else. But to scientists, the skull is one of our most precious prehistoric relics. The skull of a young Neanderthal woman had been blasted from Gibraltar's Forbes quarry in 1848. Many other Neanderthal skeletons have since been dug up by scientists, and most are far more complete than the bones found at Forbes. Yet none has their symbolic significance, for no other relic so neatly encompasses the poignant history of this lost species and the rise of our own. The Gibraltar skull is one of the most significant Neanderthal remains ever discover insight into the morphology, behavior, and genetics of the extinct relatives of modern humans. The skull was discovered in Gibraltar in 1848, years before the well-known Neanderthal discoveries in Germany, but its significance was not immediately recognized. The skull was discovered at Forbes's quarry, which is located on the northern face of the Rock of Gibraltar. This discovery was significant because it occurred nearly a decade before the first known Neanderthal specimen was discovered in the Neander Valley in 1856. Despite its importance, the skull was little studied for several years until Neanderthal fossils drew scientific attention. She provides an important window into pre-contact Neanderthal populations that were isolated but adaptable to the Iberian Peninsula's unique environmental conditions. The skull belonged to an adult female, often referred to as the Gibraltar woman. Analysis of her cranial features suggests she had a robust structure with a low sloping forehead, prominent brow ridges, and a large nasal aperture, all of which are characteristic of Neanderthal anatomy. This discovery was critical in recognizing that Neanderthals were a distinct hominin species separate from modern Homo sapiens, albeit capable of interbreeding. However, contamination issues have made it difficult to obtain an accurate age for the Gibraltar skull. The skull was discovered well before modern dating methods such as radiocarbon dating. Additionally, the skull may have absorbed substances from the environment or previous conservation treatments, complicating radiocarbon and other chemical dating methods. To protect fossils during the 19th and early 20th centuries, museums frequently used preservatives and glues which introduced contaminants. These substances can introduce exogenous carbon, making radiocarbon measurements inaccurate. Collagen is required for radiocarbon dating of bones, but the skull is extremely old, and much of the collagen has degraded, leaving insufficient material for accurate radiocarbon dating. Furthermore, precise stratigraphic data is missing because excavation techniques at the time of discovery over 175 years ago were quite primitive. Without this context, dating methods based on associated sediments cannot be used accurately. Due to these concerns, the Gibraltar skull has not been directly dated. Instead, researchers use comparative dating techniques to examine other Neanderthal remains in similar contexts. Neanderthals evolved to thrive in harsh glacial environments, and their bodies show numerous adaptations to cold climates. Despite living in the milder climate of southern Iberia, Gibraltar woman is likely to have retained the short, stocky build associated with Neanderthals. This compact body structure reduced the surface area exposed to the cold, preserving her body heat. DNA tests confirm the skull belonged to a Neanderthal female, but no other genetic information was able to be obtained. Several recent studies have confirmed that the Neanderthal frontal region showed no differences in shape or size compared to modern humans. This is because the forehead of the Neanderthal skull is sloping rather than upright because of their huge brow ridges, but the internal structure of the skull is actually more upright than you would expect. A crucial point regarding Neanderthal brains is that cranial shape, including the famous sloped forehead and elongated vault, has very little to say about brain complexity. The brain fills the space available to it. Modern humans display enormous variation in skull shape, many with pronounced slopes. Yet no anthropologist argues that these individuals are cognitively diminished. When Neanderthals and modern humans are compared internally, the space for higher-order association cortex appears remarkably similar. In other words, beneath differences in outer architecture lies a deep commonality. Even if Neanderthals lacked certain features of the modern cranial base, their endocasts show no meaningful lack of convolutional patterns and asymmetries. That is the signature of a complex, distributed brain. Even the measurement of volume, which might seem straightforward, historically involved techniques that now appear almost theatrical. Skulls were packed with mustard seed or millet, or filled with water and emptied into graduated cylinders. The brain cavity of the Neanderthal skull from Neander Valley holds 16,876 grains of water, whence its cubical contents may be estimated at 57.64 inches or 1,033.24 cubic centimeters. The measurement was repeated with dried millet, yielding 31 ounces Prussian apothecary's weight. The image is vivid. Scholars kneeling over ancient bones, pouring tiny seeds into the vault, then shaking them out to quantify the mind of a creature dead for 40,000 years. Crude, yes, but not useless. These experiments established what remains true. Neanderthals had large brains, overlapping completely with modern human ranges and slightly larger on average. With the development of computed tomography scanning, researchers no longer needed millet or water displacement. Volumes could be calculated digitally, permitting far more accurate reconstruction of cranial shape. Nevertheless, much of the classic reference literature still rests on older measurements, and these older values did a remarkable job capturing what mattered. In a sample spanning roughly 40,000 to 130,000 years ago, Neanderthal endocranial volumes ranged from about 1,170 to 1,740 cubic centimeters. Modern analysis suggests that Neanderthal endocasts do not reveal primitive patterns. Their endocasts do not show primitive features if size, convolutional patterns, and asymmetries are considered together. The Neanderthal brain was fully human, with no essential differences in its organization compared to our own. The larger size was primarily metabolic and allometric, related to a larger amount of lean body mass than our own. The implication is that brain enlargement in Neanderthals had more to do with the body it served than with any dramatic leap in cognition. Cold physical rigor and terrain demanded coordination, navigational skill, and a substantial neural budget for visual and motor control. Once this perspective is allowed, much more falls into place. For instance, recent proposals that Neanderthals devoted proportionally more neural tissue to vision and movement stand in agreement with the idea that their sensory and motor worlds were especially critical. One recent study compared orbits, noting that Neanderthals possessed larger eye sockets. This has been interpreted to mean that their eyes themselves were larger, and hence that the visual cortex may have been more extensive. The Neanderthals buried their dead. There is evidence that they cared for the injured. They lived for hundreds of thousands of years across a vast territory stretching from Spain to Siberia. These accomplishments require memory, language, coordination, learning, and social cohesion. To believe that these people lacked symbolic behavior because little of it survived is to misunderstand the fragility of evidence. This leads back to the most persistent myth, that brain size dictates intellectual ability. One researcher called this idea the tyranny of brain size, an apt description. The temptation to equate cubic centimeters with genius is ancient. When 19th century anthropologists measured skulls to rank peoples, they found what they expected. When they confronted evidence that Neanderthals had brains as large as or larger than ours, they found reasons to explain it away. Neanderthals have been demonized for primitive endocranial features that are simply non-existent. If one insisted on the logic that bigger equals brighter, Neanderthals should be the brightest of all. It is valuable to recall that cold climates place strong demands on neural systems. Neanderthals simply participated in a broader rule. Bigger bodies and colder climates encourage larger brains. There has also been discussion of cerebellar proportions. A study published in 2018 attempted to reconstruct Neanderthal cerebella by taking magnetic resonance imaging scans from over 1,000 living humans and warping these images to fit digital endocasts of Neanderthal skulls. The results suggested that Neanderthals may have had a slightly smaller cerebellum than modern humans. Because the cerebellum participates in motor control, working memory, learning and language processing, some researchers have speculated that this difference might have influenced rates of cultural innovation or social cohesion. But that interpretation remains speculative. Cerebellar size varies widely among living humans, and we do not therefore assign higher or lower intelligence to individuals on that basis. Furthermore, the cerebellum is highly integrated with the rest of the brain, so differences in shape and proportion do not map cleanly onto differences in cognitive capacity. What the study does reveal is that Neanderthals had a brain that was organized somewhat differently in its internal balance, even while following the same overall plan as our own. The Neanderthal brain was fully human, with no essential differences in its organization compared to our own. Once one sees the Neanderthal brain as a legitimate human brain, adapted to its time and place, much of the speculative baggage falls away. Their mental world was not empty, only different in emphasis. Their lives demanded superb memory of terrain, weather patterns, prey movements, seasonal shifts, and social ties within small communities. This would require a network of cognition every bit as rich as that needed to survive in tropical forests or coastal estuaries. Neanderthals were highly competent, visuospatially, which fits well with the emerging evidence. Even so, such differences do not imply a hierarchy of worth. They are simply different solutions to the same problem: how to live. It is just as plausible that Neanderthals preferred stability to novelty, intimacy to cosmopolitanism, deep apprenticeship to restless exploration. To imagine that the only valid form of human culture is one filled with beads and statues is to reveal the narrowness of our view. Most cultures in the history of our species have left no surviving art, yet their people sang, dreamed, taught, and loved. In the end, the story of the Neanderthal brain is a lesson in humility. Their brains were large, complex, and fully human. Their skulls were shaped differently, but their internal structure was modern. The basic relationship between brain size and body mass was recognized before most of us were born. The link between brain size and lean body mass had been published in 1921. Smaller brain sizes are common in tropical regions, proving that climatic factors influence neural volume. All of this shows that brain size is governed by biological relationships among size, temperature, and metabolism, and not by differences in behavior. In the quiet of that reflection lies the heart of the matter. The Neanderthal brain was not poor, it was only different in shape, and even then only slightly. Within, it bore convolutions, asymmetries, and complexity equal in dignity to our own. To imagine them as dim is to cling to a prejudice. The sloped forehead and elongated skull conceal no deficit. They are variations on a theme, the human theme. That theme is resilient, flexible, and astonishing. It takes many forms. Ours is only one. Poor Homo neanderthalensis. From the moment their bones were first recognized in the mid-19th century, they became a mirror into which Europe stared, and the reflection was shaped less by anatomy and more by fear, myth, pride, and a hunger to find a creature that would confirm our own specialness. It is astonishing how eager our species was to declare its closest relative stupid. Click on these other videos if you want to learn more, and thank you for watching.